ISO FileMaker Magazine, the professional's resource for FileMaker know-how.
Hello there and welcome back to yet another tutorial video where we're going to learn more about FileMaker Pro. My name is Matt Petrowski, bringing you these tutorials from my website, FileMakerMagazine.com. In this video tutorial, we're continuing with our series of our ultimate project. We're building a launcher. In this one, we're going to be putting in support for managing users. That's one of the first things that you do with the database. Let's head to my desktop, take a look at the file. All right, thanks for joining me here. We are going to do our best to go through what I consider to be one of the most fundamental but most simple systems for managing users when you get into building your database system. Now, the launcher file that we're working with here, if I go into the defined database and we take a look at this and we take a look at the tables, we're going to see that we've got a startup, defaults, files, layouts, diffs, and globals. Now, what's interesting here is there is no users table and there's no sessions table. And that's what we're going to be talking about in this video. Is this file, this original launcher, was something that I created just for myself. It was a one-off, a one-trick pony, something I create for myself. If you're going to create a FileMaker system, you're more than likely creating a system for multiple users. So you have to manage multiple users. If you don't already know, how you manage users in particular is in this dialog box within the security area. Now, without going into great depth with this, there are multiple ways that you can authenticate a user. The native FileMaker method, there is an account for each individual user. You have to manage this user here. The downside to FileMaker accounts is once you have multiple files, you have to have the exact same account in each of those files. So if you had 50 users and you have two files, you have to have 50 users in one file and 50 users in another FileMaker file, because FileMaker transfers credentials from one file to another. If they match, then it doesn't make you log in again with the same prompt. Now, there's only, out of the services that are listed, this Apple account, Amazon, Google, Microsoft Custom OAuth, only these, the Microsoft Entra ID and this custom OAuth, and there's also the Microsoft Azure AD. I've seen it called both. There is also just a standard Active Directory where you are able to authenticate. Only the Active Directory or the Microsoft Entra ID or the Azure AD, I believe, or this custom OAuth with something called KeyCloak truly provides you with the method in order to be able to use a group of users assigned to a privilege set versus an individual user assigned to a privilege set. All of these three, Google, Amazon, and Apple, they really, let's take a quick look just to make sure that we know what's going on. When we use FileMaker file or an external server, that external server could be the OS with a list of users, or it could be Active Directory, which could be a group. So if we take a look at, let's say, for example, Google, we can see that it's not supported on this current host. That's because FileMaker server in this particular case is not set up. But if I create a new item here, we can see that quite clearly FileMaker says there needs to be a username. Now, I cannot put some random Google name like that right there. It literally has to be a Google account that matches what that Google account is. So for me, I would have to actually have matt@isoproductions.com. That is my Google account. I would have to put that account into FileMaker in order to use it to authenticate with Google. Now, contrast that to, let's go over and take a look at a different one. We'll cancel this and we'll get right back in. No, just cancel the whole thing. FileMaker, discard, get back into the security privileges, go to Microsoft Entra ID and create a new. And here you can see with the Microsoft Entra, and in previous versions it would be called Azure AD, you have the ability to use a group, which in the outside system, a group would have multiple users. And then those multiple users would be assigned to a privilege set. So all of that aside, because this video isn't about that, it's critical that you know that there's really only two. It's these two that allow you to have, unless you're using Active Directory via an external server, to truly have a group of users and then have that any user in that group get the FileMaker privilege set. We're going to have to talk about privileges later down in this series, but since we're talking about users, what we essentially need is, let me get rid of these. We'll get rid of that one and we'll get rid of that one. Is when we are looking at our standard FileMaker accounts. Now that's what we are interested in. In this file, we are going to be adding in a system that does this right here. So when I log into this system, I am interested in a couple of things. One, who is the user that logged in? And then two, what is it that the user did while they were logged in? That's where we get into a table called session or sessions. And I've already created a table called users. We are going to see how simple this is. Now I have in the scripts, I have already set my startup script, and I'm going to be walking through all of the details of how you set this up and what the individual pieces are. But you can see in here what I did is I unchecked everything, and because I'm developing, normally, remember in my previous video I talked about I normally develop my initial script or whatever the script is in a sandbox, and this script is constantly having all of its contents actually deleted, and then I create a new script. As soon as I create that new script, then I simply just duplicate that and then move it to where I want to go. It's a very easy way of managing your scripting process. You come in, you don't have to click plus, you just select sandbox, start to add your code, duplicate, and then move. That's what I prefer to develop. But here we have a startup script. Now what we're going to see is this extremely simple script with this set field and a commit and this set field and a commit is all that's required other than the relationships in order to, did I set that back on? Turn off the sandbox, turn on the startup. So it is now command 1 right there. It allows me to quickly test this. We can see that the first time a user logs in, the startup script is going to run, and what I expect is a user account to be created, and then each time the user logs in, a new session record. And of course, during the session, you can how you track whatever they do during that session is completely up to you. You can have another table. You can use the session table itself as a logging mechanism to control what you want, which is what this is going to do. If I log in a second time, I'm going to run that script. You can see that I did not get a new user account. I got a new login action on the session. And the session can actually, you don't have to break this down into login versus log out. You can log separately. Really, in FileMaker, you can do whatever you want. You have full control. But that's what we're going to be talking about in this particular video, is how this system is set up. I'm going to walk you through it so that you understand it, and this is how you manage your users and your sessions. All right, so let's break this down. In fact, I would like to know, if you are interested, please tell me whether you like me to walk through this step by step and actually build it in the file, or if you like it already pre-built. In this scenario, I already have everything pre-built, and I'm just going to walk you through this. If you would like to see me walk through step by step, I'd be interested to know. You can leave your comments either on the article, if you're on FileMaker Magazine, or if you're on YouTube, in the comments down below. All right, so let's break this down. The very first thing we're interested in is up under the File menu, and it is the File options. We talked about this in one of the first videos, and it is this. This option right here is where we start up with FileMaker, and we are very interested to specify a layout with an associated table occurrence, which associates or relates to a actual table that more or less is empty. It has nothing. Search the FileMaker Magazine website for Low Impact Startup, a video that I did probably a decade ago talking about this. Secondary in here is in our script triggers area, we are going to wire up a script. Now, normally with a lot of my scripts, I will give my scripts the same name as the script trigger event. That applies more to layouts and objects than it does to this, because really you're using a lot of those other triggers, whereas here there is only one. You are only going to have one script for your on first window open and one script for your on last window close. So I like to call mine startup because I just carry the theme all the way through. So we can see that when we go to the defined database, we can see in our tables, if we take a look at the launcher tool over here, my original, the One Trick Pony, it does not have a users table. It does not have a sessions table. Now, those are super simple to set up. All I did is create my users and my sessions. It created my default fields, of which there are 12 of them. And we go into the users table, and we can see that a few were added. I added the account name and a last login. Those two fields, other than my defaults that come with the defaults. Go see the first video in the series if you're interested about the environment and where you can set up a file that controls what are the default fields that are created every time that you create a new FileMaker table. These are my preferred, and we're going to get into them as we go through this series. So with the account name and the last login, what we're going to do is we are going to walk through the relationship most critically and importantly by taking a look at it in the relationships and breaking it out here. We will look at users and then sessions, and we'll get this all on screen. So the first thing that I want you to recognize is that we have multiple types of relationships, and in the users table in particular, I want to make sure that when a user logs in, there is only ever one record in the users table that belongs to any given login. That's it. I can't have multiple Matt accounts in my users table. That would not work. Now, normally what we would see in a lot of our relationships, it is either going to be a 1, which is indicated right there with nothing, versus a many, which is the little triple crow's feet. So you're going to have many times a many to many, or a one to many, or a one to many. Really doesn't matter in FileMaker whether this is on this side of it or whether it's on this side of it. You will see that if I have this over here and I double click the relationship, I've got users and then startup. If I close that dialog and I move this over here and double click the relationship, you'll see I'll have startup and I'll have users. FileMaker doesn't care. It works with both sides in terms of what's going on. What's critical is when the relationship is open is these three options of allow creation, so it's create, delete, and sort. We'll cancel that. In this scenario, we only are going to be working with the allow creation. So the way that this works is because we're ending up, when the file starts up, we've got our file options. The file options are automatically dumping the user onto this table occurrence or on a layout tied to this table occurrence, where this table occurrence is tied to the startups table. In that table is only one field and one field only, and you can see clearly it is get account name. And critically, when we are in that specification, we have not only specified that it is text, not a number, which it may default to, but make sure it's text, because relationships on both sides need to often match in terms of their data type. There are very few instances where you will have, you can, say, for example, have a text relationship that is a global to multiple numbers, as long as you have multi values in that, which are multiple numbers. It's a multi-key relationship is what it's called. We'll get into that much later. But most critically, our storage options, we don't want a global field for this. Most of the time when we're using a get function with anything with the environment, we are turning on this option, do not store calculation results. That's because it will always calculate real time, and we do not need it to be indexed. If you're curious about the index, we're going to talk about the indexing as we go through this series, but there are many videos on the FileMaker Magazine website about indexes. A wonderful way, if you're interested in this series, you're like learning FileMaker, you will get thousands of more videos over at FileMaker Magazine, and for the annual cost of a subscription, doesn't even compare. You will just learn so much. So with this now being an unstored, that's where we get this little stop sign right here, or I think of it as the stop sign, meaning this is an unindexed field. So in my mind, the way that this works is this is now a unidirectional relationship. It can only happen from startup into users. It's not bidirectional. Whereas if this was 1 to 1, I would be able to go in both directions. Or if it was many to many, I could go in both directions. But in this case, I can really only think that I can go from startup to users. I can create a layout based on users. In fact, this would be the layout that I would create for the user management. But I can look back into startup, but really startup is only ever going to have one record. I really wouldn't be doing that in that direction. Also note that I am on my graph going to make notes and do it as often as I can and say what is happening. Creating a note and saying this is the database entry point, or if it makes more sense to you, the solution entry point. Whatever it is, indicate that this is where the user comes in. So with that relationship, we've got an unstored of just the account name. The user can't change that. That is all managed within the managed security or in the external authentication. Over here in the users, on this field, the account name, when we look at that in the users, critically, that is going to have this option, or these options right here. Under the validation tab, the second one, normally FileMaker is going to look like that, where it allows the user, if they have access to the field, or your script, to override this data entry. When we want to turn that off, we never want the script to be able to ever set another account name. And we are going to change it to always, so that it always validates if we ever write a script where it does try to create another record. Now, what controls whether a relationship is a one to many is this right here. This one checkbox of unique value is what makes a relationship a one, meaning it does not have the crow's feet. It only has just the one going in. In a lot of FileMaker, there are optimizations that you can get where you can do a one-to-one relationship in order to offload data that isn't commonly used. It's an optimization strategy, and we will learn about it, maybe not in this series, but I will probably discuss it at some point. You can also use a custom message here to indicate what happens. Now, ideally, this message will never come up, because the way that we're going to structure our relationships is such that it will always and only ever create that one record of that account once and once only when the user initially logs in the first time. Now, the other table that we have is going to be this session table. Now, the session table is simply just a place where we can say the user logged in, what did they do during that session? Now, I'll give you a clue. It is possible to track whatever you want to track about what the user does, what buttons they clicked, what layouts they went to, what scripts they ran. You can track whatever you want within the session being the time frame that the user was logged in doing something after they logged out, however you want. You can track all of it within one single field in the session table. Or, because we're creating a relational database system, you can create yet another table to manage what they actually did. And that might look something like this right here, where you have a session table, which is just a table to track when the user logged in or took a particular action, as we'll see. And then you can have session actions. That would be yet another table where each new record in that session would be tied to the session, the duration of time the user was logged in, and what they did. they clicked this button on this layout. They did this. I mean, you can literally track every single action that a user takes, and that will inform you about how your database is used and what happens and what the user does and all the interesting stuff that you typically want to know in a database system. For right now, all we're going to do is put in the core of the users and the session. I'll say don't save for right now. And so what else do we have here? Over here, right off the bat, without getting into a simple relationship, we have a multi-predicate relationship. And what that simply means is when you hear this term, multi-predicate relationship, all it means is you have multiple pieces of information used for the relationship. Now, we're not going to get into the operators here where we have multiple of the not equals, greater than, less than, greater than, equals to, these two right here, and the Cartesian join. Those are all used in different scenarios, but for the most part, an equijoin, as it's known, is what most of your relationships are going to be. And a lot of the times you're going to equally join on multiple pieces of information. Now, I am doing that in this particular case for one simple reason, and it is because of this relationship. FileMaker has this situation, which I have always called it obligatory create. I forget what some of the other developers call it, but I think of it that way because FileMaker is obliged to create a record somewhere when a particular value is not filled. So when we look at our relationship here, we know that in the startup table, let's move this off to the side. In the startup table right here, we have an unstored calculated field of the account name, meaning it can't be changed. Nobody can change it. When the user logs in, they authenticate, whether it's Google, external, or whether FileMaker says, yes, you got the right password. This account name field knows that it is whoever logs in. In my case, it's Matt. This field right here is just a normal text field where it says in this table there can only ever be one of this particular value. That's good. We want to ensure that. And then over here, this account name is just the name of whatever the account was, and it will recur multiple times. I will have multiple session records with that same account name because I want to be able to search. Let's find out. How many sessions did Matt have within the month of October? So that's going to be a date range search where you specify the range for the month of October, and then you actually specify that account name, which could be a different search for a different user at a different time, giving you the results that you want. FileMaker's obligatory create works like this. When we have this option turned on, the allow creation of records. Now, in this case, we can see users is over here, and a user record is able to create a session record because this is turned on. This is your primer into relationships. If I'm over in the session table cannot create a record in the users table unless I was to turn the option on right here for this particular one. So that's all we have to know about FileMaker currently until we get to what are known as cascading deletes, which is going to be another topic for another video at another time. And that's when we're dealing this option, and I deal with it completely differently within FileMaker. Rarely will I have a relationship where both of these are turned on in my FileMaker solutions. I just don't. That's because FileMaker does not have really good documentation with regards to the graph and what is going on here visually. I cannot see visually, looking at this relationship, what its attributes are. I don't know whether it allows creation, deletion, and whether it sorts. Those three things. I have to literally go in, double click it, and observe the checkbox in order to see what's going on. So my preference is to separate your concerns, and I keep my deletes separate from my creations. So in my solutions, I typically only ever have creations turned on, and it's just a way that I like to develop. So the way that we read this is we've got our account name. It's going to create a record with the account name if it doesn't exist. I am going to have a last login value, and that last login value is going to come from the modified on field in the session when the session is created. So now all we have to do is walk through the script. So I probably already showed you this, but in the startup options, we already saw that our default startup context is right there because of the switch to layout. Our script trigger is our startup script, and when we look at our startup script, there is a paranoia step that we have right here on screen. We can pretty much assume that when this script startup actually runs, because the file options right here has this setting turned on, our context implied is startup. Now, there are two different ways we can think about our development. Many times we want things to be absolute and explicit. That is what this is right here. This is explicitly saying when the startup script runs, we are going to go to the startup layout. Now, there's really no consequence to me here. I am already on the startup script, so this more or less provides great documentation. This is where code itself is self-documenting. But I really don't have to have that if I don't want it, because I know that my context, because of the file options, is already where I need to be. But I do suggest that you actually just keep that there because it provides you with the documented, self-documenting code. Now, these two steps, this set field and this set field, are what creates the records that FileMaker is obliged to create. First off, when we set a field, FileMaker, because of that process, if the account record doesn't exist, is going to initially create the record, and then we're going to commit it. The reason that we need this first commit after setting the field to empty is when we set to the session, what happens is remember our relationship. We are setting a field called action to whatever the action is for the session. And I'm thinking here in terms of we're going to have logins and logouts with regards to sessions. If I wanted to, I can change the thought process up, and rather than setting the action of login and another action to log out, thereby having two records for a particular session, if I only want to have one session, I could revise my thinking, and I might do that. That's a thing that happens in the evolution of database systems. I might rethink how I would do this and actually just have both the login and log out fields in that one session record, and just have one session record for each time that the user has a session. And depending on how I'm managing all of my session actions or whatever the user does, if I'm going to have another table, what have you, or whether I'm just going to track it all in one field within that one session record, that's something that I need to think about. My goal here was to show you how you can actually manage your users. It's the first thing you should think about, because you're going to ultimately end up with preferences that you want to manage and all kinds of other things related specifically to when a user logs in. Last layout that they were on, to return them to that layout, so the next time they start up, they've got familiarity, all that cool stuff. So the double commit is actually what's happening, and we can see this if we simply just run the debugger. Remember, we have already set up our tools. We've got Control B. We're going to invoke that right there, put that on screen, and we are going to walk through this and see what happens when we hit our Command 1. Select our context. Remember, FileMaker is going to take context into account, and even though I am explicitly establishing context by going to the layout, if I'm right here, this layout would switch to the layout that is right here, the startup layout, which I'm intending to be on. So I might as well just select the layout, hit Command 1. I have now invoked the debugger, and I can now use my step into right here, F6, and I'm going to say, go to the layout. Well, I'm already on the layout, so no change will show. I am going to set the last login to empty. So this field right here goes clear because a new session is going to be started. I'm emulating the startup here. When this new session is created, the modified date right here will be pulled into this field. That is because this value was set to nothing. FileMaker is obliged to populate that field. Also, we're getting another effect is because the relationship doesn't match anything. In other words, right now, if we were to go into that relationship dialog box, the last login, in order for it to relate to a record in the session table, would have to have a record where the modified field is empty, which it never can be, and the action also means equals login. Since that condition will never exist, there will never be a situation where FileMaker, who creates a record with a modification date, if that can never be the case, because this is empty and that's what the relationship is saying, FileMaker is obliged to create that session record. And that's exactly what it does. So when we set the field to empty, and now when we set this login, FileMaker asks itself, is there a record where the modification field is empty and there is a record with the value of login? Doesn't exist. The record is in turn created, and as a byproduct of that, FileMaker populates this last login field to that modification date, which happens to be the last time that the user logged in. So if any other user is logged in, and I want to know when was the last time Matt logged in, I have captured that into a field on the user record. It's a really cool 2-for-1 deal that you get in this scenario because of FileMaker. And the reason that we have put that, I've done this as one of the first introductions to relationships in here, is because that one critical understanding is a fundamental tenet of how you can program a lot of things in FileMaker. There are a lot of ways that you can solve problems in FileMaker. It is absolutely possible that I could have had a solution where the user starts up on the startup table, on a startup layout, and neither of these two tables are connected. They are absolutely disconnected. I don't even use FileMaker's relationship structure. Instead, what I do is I write a script that goes over to a user's table, does some checking for the user, does a lookup. If the user doesn't exist, I took a variable along in the script, and if the user didn't exist, I create a new record with a create new record. I set the field to the user, and then I go over to the session table, and that's part of my script. If you understand what we've gone through, what we have achieved with just a very small handful of script steps has bypassed a lot of other code that would create something like go to layout, go to the layout of the users, enter find mode, set a field to whatever, perform the find. You can see these are a lot of steps. If not get found count, create record or records. Let's go right here. New record request right there. Then set the field to the actual, this is a lot of scripting where throughout this series, we are going to take every opportunity to take advantage of these little nuances that once you understand how FileMaker works with regards to its underlying structure, you get benefits where you get extremely condensed, tight code that basically takes advantage of features where you're able to do this. Now, those steps that I went through, where you are go to this table, do this checking, etc., there are absolutely situations where we are going to want to do that. And I will explain those scenarios in this video series, because what happens is When we land on this startup layout in FileMaker, if there was a portal on this layout, it would read in every one of these fields on that portal just because they exist. There are times in FileMaker where we want to optimize our structure, and we maybe don't want to have these be connected. Maybe we do want this to be disconnected, and we want to be able to work independently and only go get just one piece of information, a lot of the times a key value, which I call my field's ID, and bring it back in order to drive a relationship by ourselves using a script in order to only get smaller amounts of data. We're going to talk about that through this series, but it is my hope that by walking through this, you can see that FileMaker can get a lot done really quickly. And in this situation, we now have users and we now have sessions, and we're going to be able to move from here. Our tool is going to be, our new launcher is going to be not just a one-trick pony, but is now going to have users and sessions. Multiple users can log in. We can have multiple people managing multiple files if they want to. We will build it for ourselves as a tool, but we're going to build this as if it was a full-fledged FileMaker solution that the team can allow all these links to come in, and maybe you can only see the links to other FileMaker solutions that you open that are appropriate to you as a user. In fact, this will work as a corporate launching solution once we get done with this, if you wanted to use it for that case. As always, I'd like to wish you much luck with your own FileMaker development, and until next time, happy FileMaking.
We hope you've enjoyed this video tutorial, and we'd like to say thank you for your subscription and your support. If you're not already a subscriber, head on over to www.filemakermagazine.com/subscribe for more information about the benefits of joining.